Okay, well, welcome everyone. For those of you who've not been to a Vectric user group meeting before, hopefully that video introduction just gives you a flavour of what for the last 10 years they've been like. Unfortunately, here we are again. We find ourselves once more trying to do the best we can with using the internet to try and recapture that experience. And we obviously a little bit sad that we can't see all of our friends and colleagues in the US again this year, but maybe next year. Let's hope so. And also, it's not all bad news because it does mean that we've got more than 1,000 people signed up with interest to this 3-day event that we're going to run online. And of course, I know that you come from all around the world. So this is another opportunity for us to welcome the global Vectric community, and we do hope you're going to find this all interestingly enough. For those of you who don't know who I am, I'm Edward Powell, the Managing Director of Vectric. So with me, I'm going to get involved in all the demos along with my team, who are way more capable than me, but for now, you've got amateur hour with me, and I'm going to try my best to muddle through various demos. Hopefully, you'll find it interesting. What I'm really hoping to cover just for now is mostly to direct you to where you need to go for the next couple of days to get everything you need. So we've created a dedicated website as we did last year, which is ugm.vectric.com. Hopefully, many of you have discovered it already, but if you haven't, head over there now. This is going to be the go-to place over the next 3 days. It holds all of the crucial information that you're going to want to know, the schedules. You can set notification for yourself. You can create your own account, so it's very simple. We don't really do much in the way of securing that onerously, so it's really straightforward. Just put your email address in and you can log in, and by doing so, I mean, you don't have to do it, right, but if you do it, you can get involved in the chat. And as I'm going to emphasize in a minute, I think these user group meetings really work because everyone gets involved, and it's a two-way communication, not just a transmit from us. And I hope as well that you'll have the opportunity to talk to one another. So in amongst that, we've got the first opportunity to show some things that you've created. So we'll have a few bits and bobs on here that some of the team have worked on, but ideally the show and tell section, which you can get to from this top bar here, allows you to upload some pictures of your projects and talk about them, and people can ask you questions, and hopefully you'll take the time to answer and discover things about the work that each of you are doing in different areas of the CNC world. We've also got the chat window. This is going to be particularly important, I think, during discussions of the videos. So what we're going to do here, some of the videos are live streamed and some are pre-recorded, but in every case, the people who created those presentations will be available live to answer your questions and get involved in chat. Okay, so please do ask anything that you're interested in as and when it comes up. And the one benefit of us doing some pre-recorded ones this year, which we learned the lesson from last year, is that it gives us much more opportunity to read, properly engage in the conversation that goes on around the presentations themselves. So yeah, please do take a look there, ask anything that you're interested to know from the presenters, and they'll do their best to answer your questions. One thing I also want to mention is the content that we've produced here is all available in a downloadable pack at the end of this event. There is a small cost just to cover the administration and the production of this electronic download, but it is really good value, we hope. So it includes tons of files related to the presentations that you see, so that you don't need to take notes or follow along exactly. If you get hold of this, you'll get copies of all the files that we use and create in our presentations, as well as some bonus bits and bobs, some bits of clip art, the resulting pieces of 3D models that, as we'll see in a minute, some of our presenters are going to make various parts, and we've given all those away at the same time. The clip art alone, which is from Designer Make, professionally produced clip art from Designer Make, all new, and would conventionally go on sale for around about $180 on its own. So it's a really good value pack, and if you go along to the shop there, you'll be able to purchase that as an electronic download. All right, so let's talk about the schedule. Now, throughout this event on the next 3 days, you'll be able to see what's running now on the stage. You'll also be able to see the schedule of what's coming up, and you can set yourself little notifications if you want to be reminded to watch a particular presentation as it is streamed. Okay, but the schedule is basically over 3 days. Day one on today, starting with me right now, as you can see, is just a welcome introduction. In a minute, I'm going to do away with PowerPoint, and we're going to get into some software discussions about what's new, but it's kind of more than what's new. There's loads of what's new about 11 out now because it's been out a couple of months. What I've tried to do is distill why some of these features are there, right? Not so much just what they are, but why have we done it this way, and what benefits does it bring you in normal workflow in an everyday real grounded project. So I've tried to follow through with just 2 or 3 very real projects and show you the benefits of what we've done and why that should really improve your daily workflow. The times, I should emphasize, are in British summertime. It's still just about summer here in the UK. And so that BST means obviously you'll need to do local conversion for your time zone. But what we've tried to do is spread them, as you can see, across the afternoons and evenings to try and capture as many time zones as we can. Okay, so starting with me, I'll talk for about an hour, the next hour, and then we'll be over to Becky. Hopefully you all know Becky. She is one of the mainstays of our monthly projects of the month, and a Vectric engineer. And she's going to start really part of a 2-parter. We'll see the second part later on in the schedule to talk about how she goes about modeling. Right, so this is an Aspire topic, and it will be, broadly speaking, an introduction, if you like, to 3D component modeling. Then we've got the first of our many guest speakers, Bill. So Bill Young's from long-standing friend of ours from ShopBot. He's going to be looking at a variety of projects, one of which is about making little school desks, but really it's about a set of the projects that over the last couple of years, when the pandemic struck, he looked at a lot of community-like projects that he could apply his CNC skills to. So he's going to talk us through those. It covers a whole range of things, and so it doesn't matter what software you have from us, there are going to be something in there for everyone. Then you're back to me, sadly, for Amateur Hour 2, in which I'm going to talk about a wooden puzzle that I run through right from first principles. So we talk about the concept all the way through to assemble parts, and hopefully you'll find some of that interesting. And like I say, it's warts and all, including some head-scratching errors, which I have to correct. But we thought, yeah, why not? You want to see how we do this stuff, and let's not kid ourselves that we don't make mistakes sometimes. So you'll enjoy the fact that I forget to fill it some of the edge keys of those pieces. But anyway, we come back and fix it in the demo. Then we've got props, a slightly slicker one from one of my other support engineers. So this is David, who's relatively new to our team, just joined the company just over a year ago, and he's going to work through actually using some of the component models that Becky is going to show you how they're made. So she actually builds these models in her demos, and then David uses it to construct a sign. So it's perform the central motif of a sign for Oktoberfest. So hopefully we're getting close to Oktoberfest. I am actually in Central Europe right now, so I'm hoping that I might partake of a little bit of Oktoberfest if all goes according to plan. Next, we're over to the second of our guest speakers, and Mike LeGregny. He's a long-standing CNC guru, really. He's a retired ex-military man and former law enforcement officer. So he's done a lot of work in sign making around military insignia, and he's going to do us quite a broad ranging view of those signs that he's made over the years. And that'll bring to a close day 1. On day 2, we're going to kick off with Todd, who again is almost certainly somebody you will have heard speaking in our monthly projects. So he has been doing CNC forever and a day, and is one of the primary modelers who started off the D&M clip art collection. And he's going to look a little bit at a project which is going to make use of the new segmenting functionality. So I don't want to spoil it all for you, but he uses the segmenting on a model to allow him to hide a secret message in the design. And then we're going to go back to David again from the support team, and he's going to sort of really do a deep dive into the tool database and the changes we've made there and how to get the most out of your tool database. The tool database is one of those things that starts simple, right? It's just basically a list of your tool geometry that you're going to use and some feeds and speeds, but it can quickly, actually, the devil is in the detail here, and you can start to find that there's loads of power in the way that you organize those things, which will save you hours and hours of time if you use it, to its full potential. So he's going to talk through the structure of the tool database, including laying out material structures, the structure of materials and machine types, etc. Then we're over again to another guest speaker. So Shane Peters has been working in a particular kind of niche, if you like, but it's such a broad appeal, and when you see the results, you'll see it's a really kind of lovely result of using VCarving to create effectively recesses into which you pour and polish back coloured epoxy resins or clear epoxy resins. So it's a kind of an alternative, if you like, to the V inlay route, where instead of inlaying wood into wood, you effectively inlay epoxy resins into the wood. He self-confessed says this is basically all he does day in, day out, and he's made a very, very good living from it. So hopefully you'll find some interesting aspects of that style of working to take away from that presentation. And then it's again to Becky to do that second half of that presentation I was mentioning before. So she's looked at the basics of modeling. Now she's going to take some vector art work in and show you some more advanced techniques. And again, all working towards the pieces of clip art that David used in that Oktoberfest sign. Then again, over to another hopefully familiar but not Vectric presenter this time. But Mark Lindsay has had a very successful internet show for some years now, and he's going to use the two-sided toolkit in our products. So working from one side of the material, flipping over and carving the other side to make a more sophisticated 3D part out of a solid piece of wood. And he's making himself a shop clock using that technique. And then again, over to our next set of guests. This time it's the team from Avid CNC. So this is Sammy, Corey and Brian, and they're going to talk about making a dust shoe. So it's a very practical part that if you don't have on your CNC right now, I don't have one on this one, for example, and I'll make a right mess with it, generally speaking. So they're going to show us how to make a dust shoe for their machine. But more importantly, the dust shoe is made of different materials. So they're going to talk about the implications for machining and tooling and feeds and speeds and stuff when you start to think about materials other than wood. So hopefully, again, this will be a slightly different from core software, but still very, very much of interest to all of us, I'm sure. Day 3. So we're going to start with the Tiki Totem. This is Nav, another of our newer software engineers who works in the support team. And this is his first full project using the rotary setup that we have at the office at Vectric. So this is all built off the Shopbot rotary setup we have there. And what he is going to show you, we know from our discussions with lots and lots of our customers that the most common piece of extra equipment that people buy with their CNC machine is a rotary setup. And we also know that it's the piece of equipment that they end up using least. And part of that is because there's a little bit of fear about getting started with it. There's some setup implications and stuff. So now it's going to talk to all that. And mostly what it's going to show you is from a relatively simple model, what a fantastically intricate and detailed 3D piece you can make. So hopefully he will encourage those of you who've got your rotary set up and have never dusted it off to get it out and give it a go after you see what he can produce in that demo. And then back to Todd, and Todd's going to look at really just ways to get the most out of 3D machining a D&M project. So he's going to take the D&M clip art. Obviously we sell that separately on the D&M site, but you've also got huge numbers of pieces of clip art now as part of the free bundles that you've got with the software. So hopefully he will help you to see how to take those and make some really good 3D parts from them. And then we're going to look at the wood inlay. So we've kind of seen the epoxy inlay, and now we're going to come back and honestly, if you've not seen V-bit inlays as a technique, then there's no one better really than Andy Johnson to take us through this process. He's really skilled at it. He's been doing it a long time, and you'll see that if you've not seen this approach to making wood inlays using a V-bit tool, it produces some really stunning high quality results. And once you get the techniques down, it doesn't require a massive amount of skill. It just requires you to get a little bit of your head around the technique. So hopefully that will get you through that. Then Sammy and Corey are back from Avid. This time they're going to be looking at using basically topographic data. So I think I did a talk on this a couple of years ago, so some of you may have seen, and I use the site called Topo, which basically allows you to pretty much pick an area without a Google light search and get back a 3D model of it. And Sam and Corey are going to take you through the process of taking that model and using it in various ways to produce nice topographical and physical parts from it. I love that stuff, so I shall definitely be watching that one for sure. Then we're over to our dev team. So we've got two representatives of the dev team, Mike and Adam. Adam is the technical director of the company, and Mike is one of the newer devs who's just joined. So you've kind of got both ends of the experience spectrum there, and they're going to be talking to you about the bits of the software really that are put in place to nail efficiency. So they're going to be looking at some of those, I guess, some of those checkboxes and tick options that you kind of vaguely spot but never use. We're going to really drill down and see what they're there for and in what circumstances they can make a big difference to your machining times and the quality of your finish. And then it's back to actually one of the unsung heroes of the UGM in many ways. So Stephanie is our marketing director, and so she's actually been in charge in broad terms of much of the organisation of what you're going to experience over the next 3 days. And she's also been thrown into the mix to give us a presentation. Her background before she joined Vectric actually was to work with a paints and varnishes and brushes company. So she worked with all of the tools and kits associated with finishing wood. And so she's going to take some of that experience that she's learned and put together a little presentation about how to go about putting those finishing touches to the part once it's been cut. And I think they're going to be looking at upcycling and different sorts of effects and finishes that you can produce effectively and efficiently using these techniques. And then I shall have a little close out, hopefully in 3 days' time, and we hope you're going to enjoy it. It only just remains me to say before we move on to my What's New demo that it's really important that everyone participates, right? So this event's only going to work really in the next couple of days if you get involved. So I really do hope you'll get back to that website, log in if you've not already, get yourself some credentials on that chat area, post some pictures of stuff that you've done. Honestly, it's a very, very supportive community that we're part of. We're really lucky, and everyone's interested. Post pictures of what you've done, ask people if they're doing stuff that's similar. This could be the beginning of a beautiful friendship. All right, and I hope it is. Okay, so that's enough of my PowerPointy what's new. Let's start thinking about getting into the software for a demo. Right, so what we have here is a moderately complicated design. So the plan here is clearly to have 3 layers of material to make this bottle opener. 2 thicknesses of wood. Sandwiched between the 2 thicknesses of wood is a 3mm bit of brass, which is actually going to form the main part of the, what would you call that? I don't know. The tooth. I don't know what the technical term is for a bottle opener, but the tooth of the bottle opener is made of brass, and it's just offset in a little bit from the rest of the wooden cover. So it's a fairly typical job, but it involves 3 types of materials: 2 thicknesses of wood, 1 set of brass. We've also got the potential here to add an acrylic inlay as well. So potentially 4 different types of material listed here. So let's start looking at this more closely, and we can see a couple of things I want to change straight away about this design. The first thing is I've got these profiles here that are filleted versions of the nut geometry, so that there will be a captured nut to fix the 2 layers of wood to the brass inlay, brass insert, I should say. And I can see already that the height of these is 7mm, but on the notes here it says they should be 8mm. Now these are kind of unusual shapes, and I want to resize them all together. This used to be quite awkward if we used the resizing in the previous version of the software, and you try to resize a group. They would resize around the center of the group. So you can see here that as I select multiple objects, we put a bounding box around all of the selection, not just the individual objects, and they have their own center of rotation, etc., etc. So now what we can do is actually ask it to scale the items individually with this setting here. And this forces the software to do the scaling. So in this case, I'm going to increase the height from 7mm to 8mm, but it will do it for each object in the selection individually. So what you should see is that they will stay in place, which is the important thing. So that allows you to resize selections of objects all over your design simultaneously, but without changing their position, which used to be really difficult to do previously. So it's a small thing, but quite nice. Another small thing that's very nice is I want to change the name of this green inlay to describe actually that's going to be acrylic. Okay, so I'm just going to edit the acrylic, the text box here, and start typing acrylic. Now I'm a bit of a terrible speller, so I'm not quite sure how to spell acrylic, and you can see here now that we have the option, we've got the classic red underlining that you should be familiar with from lots of software, because we've added spell checking. And you can see here that it's either sacro-iliac that I'm after or acrylic, so I can now select that. It supports multiple languages and should work in the usual way. So you'll see the underlining in text whenever there's a potential spelling error. So hopefully that will solve a lot of problems for those of you out there like me who are a little bit challenged on the spelling. The next, again, very simple thing, but really handy just to point out. So I'm going to drop in a little hand-drawn arrow here. And as I start to draw, I kind of come across, and I want to put a line in here. But actually, that's not right. I can use the backspace key. So when I press the backspace key now, I can kind of go back through my line drawing, a line at a time, to get back to where I need to be. I can even go right back to the beginning of this line drawing. And that will allow me to kind of put in the correct thing that I want to do. So the backspace key just allows you to sort of effectively step back through a freehand line drawing. It's very handy, but a small but significant improvement. Okay, so there's a couple of little quick new things which I hope are all adding to a smoother experience. But the big problem with this file, when we actually look at it really, is trying to describe this moderately complicated part in the previous versions of the software involved quite a lot of head scratching, and our main organizational technique was layers. And you can see here that this file has got a lot of layers. The layers obviously there's some here that are automatically generated. So this is probably a common thing for those of you who ever import DXF. You will often see, for example, that layers come in that are empty because the DXF file generates a layer automatically, whether it's got content on or not. And if you import that DXF into the file, you'll often get dozens of these empty layers, which you have no interest in. You can see they're empty because you may not be aware, but right from the beginning, we only draw onto the little associated icon next to the layer shapes if there's actual content on the file. So I can see that there's content on the first set of named layers, but these numbered layers are empty. It used to be, you could just delete them. You could see that they were empty and you could delete them, and it was a little bit laborious. There's no questions about deleting them because there's no data to move. So another little quick but really significant improvement from an efficiency point of view now is in the delete, you can actually delete empty layers in one go. So that's easily done, tidies up a lot of artwork very quickly. But now we're sort of stuck with the layers that we really need, and they've got content on. And if we look at the nature of these layers, you can see that there's a sort of mix. We're using it for a mixture of things. We're using it to kind of represent design elements, which we want to kind of keep colored, for example, or independent. But we also need to end up kind of creating layers that hold things like the artwork related with the actual machining. So in this case, we've got a filleted version of that, which is going to form the actual pocket and the actual inlay that we cut. And they, again, having to be represented in their own layers, and the whole thing gets quite complicated. So we've got layers that represent effectively machining things, and layers that represent design things, and some layers that are just there for structural purposes, right? One of the key, this is really common, because as soon as you have a part that's got to be manufactured from multiple materials, you need to organize your artwork somehow, and that's the only way we've had to do it. But let me now go across to the new version of software, where we have really extended the existing concepts, which did exist in the context of nesting, of sheets, which is really taking another whole chunk of organizational infrastructure and expanding it to make it much more useful. So in this case, hopefully I can show you that in this next file. So I'll close this one down. Don't need to save it. Okay, so I have got the new file up here, which is really started as the same file from 10.5, but now what I've done is restructured it and rebuilt it to make use of the new features in 11. And in particular, we're going to take a good look at how we can now deal with different materials using the extensions we've made to the Sheets feature. So first thing to note is the design space is basically the same. So I've kept a place here to do all my design, but over here on the left, you'll see we now have a Sheets tab. And if I zoom out a little bit in the 2D view, you can see that what I have been able to do is also create, alongside the design space, actual work areas that represent the true pieces of material from which I'm going to cut the final parts of this job. And as we discussed earlier, there's some 2.5mm acrylic, which has got the inlay in it. On the top surface, we're going to use slightly thicker wood so we can drop the inlay into a pocket there. Then we've got the brass inner, which forms the actual mechanically strong part of the bottle opener. And then on the back, it's also another piece of wood, but I've also dropped in a little decorative logo here, which we'll show you in a second. I'm going to use to laser engrave the back as well. So that's the basic structure of the file now that we can use sheets, right? So we can break out those things that we had to store as overlapping and fairly complicated layers of data. Anything that specifically now relates to the brass bit, I can move on to the brass sheet. So the cutout passes and things related to that, and the vectors in general that are associated with the mechanics of machining this part as opposed to the design phase can all live on the appropriate part of the design, appropriate part of the file for manufacturing as opposed to design. One thing as well that's worth pointing out is if I select these sheets, so we can move around the sheets fairly easily. We've got various options. I'll show you on the Toolpath selector in a minute that you can do sheet selection from there as well. But basically you can double click anything in the sheets list and that becomes the active sheet, and the active sheet is the white one with the others around it. You can also just double click in the 2D view to move around your sheets selection, and obviously you can add and edit them from this list here at any point. If we just pick the design one, for example, and I click edit, you can see the settings are fairly familiar for anyone who's used our software before, because it's broadly the set of stuff that used to be associated with the job. But now the job can involve several types of material. So you can see that we can set not only the dimensions here, but also the date and position, and that's significant for a couple of reasons. Most immediately useful, I think, is that when you do have a design space that's separate from your manufacturing space and you're designing something which is essentially symmetrical, you'll often notice that we set the origin in the middle. And this because it's much easier to design around a central location. You can mirror things left and right, top and bottom when you're working on your design, and it's kind of easier to see the balanced layout if you do it around a centered origin. But this is almost never right for machining, so generally speaking, especially if we're going to do multi-material parts like this, we're going to want to minimize material wastage. We're going to want to tuck the part in the bottom, say, corner of our piece of material, and trying to know the dimensions of the design from a central origin and find that on your machine and make sure you don't run over the edges is more complicated usually than you need, certainly in lots of examples. I mean, it might not be the case for a single sign, but for lots of cases, you kind of want your datum to be somewhere from which everything will be up and to the right, say. And this is now pretty straightforward because our design space can have the origin in the middle, but each of our parts can have its own datum that can be in a completely different location. So here I've moved to the first piece of wood, and you can see the datum for the wood, 00, is actually the bottom left corner. And this means that any toolpaths I create on this sheet will be relative to a datum in the bottom left corner. Each sheet can have its own datum, so this gives you a lot of flexibility within one file to handle those complexities of how you want to actually manufacture this part in practice. Okay, so that's a quick whiz round. So you can see basically the sheets here. Let's now go across and look at the toolpath and see what that can do for us. I'm going to pin those out because we're going to be in there a little bit for the next few minutes. And I also want to show you the layered structure that I've been able to replace the previous file, and hopefully you can see that it's a lot simpler. So I've really only got a few layers now, the design and logo and labels. So in other words, I've got layers relating to the design elements. And then I've got a series of layers here, cutouts, pockets, the laser brand, and a chamfer, which are all layers where the artwork relates to a particular toolpath strategy that I'm going to apply. Now notice, if I just zoom out so you can see all of the sheets here, and I just say turn off the chamfer for a second. Must remember to turn that on again in a minute. But if I toggle off the cutouts here, you can see that the cutout layer contains artwork on more than one sheet. Okay, so the sheets and layers are completely independent of one another in the latest version of the software. So each sheet can have content from layers. The way I think about this is imagine it's a table laid out where the rows are your sheets and the columns are your layers, and so you can put stuff in any box in that table. So in other words, some sheets can have content from one or more layers, or no content from that layer, and that allows you to do this process I'm doing here, where we can take something like all of the geometry associated with the final cutout and having some data on every sheet that's also associated with that layer. Why do you want to do that? Well, if I just turn back on the chamfers as well, it means that I can use the power of the Toolpath templates much more efficiently now for multi-material parts like this. If you recall, and hopefully you've had a go with this at various points when you've been using the software, but you can create a Toolpath template simply by associating typically the Toolpath strategy with a named layer of geometry. So instead of selecting the thing you want to cut out, you say cut out anything that you find that's on a layer called cutout. And then you can save that and reload it in at any time into a completely new file. And as long as that file has geometry on a layer called cutout, you can calculate that toolpath against it. And it means all the settings associated for a particular strategy that you use frequently can be created once and applied across lots and lots of different designs. So that's what I've done here. I'm just going to load in my example, and I've got one here called Pocket, Chamfer and Cut, which does pretty much what it says on the tin. So what it's done there very rapidly is it's gone across each of my sheets. It's looked for each of the toolpath strategies in that file for geometry on that sheet that's on the layer that it needs for that particular toolpath strategy, and then it's just applied the toolpath if it can. You can see that up here we've got a sort of selection, a separate selection for sheets, but this just maps all the others. So in fact, if just to be for clarity here, you can see as I double click the acrylic, you'll see that it changes to acrylic up in the list here, and it also changes to acrylic on this drop down. Okay, so these are all in sync. The acrylic, the 2D view, the drop down in the toolpath layer, the 2D view, and the list, they're all the same, right? There's just an active sheet at any one moment in time. What can cause you a bit of confusion is we also have some groups in here. So we put the toolpaths in groups, which you may or may not want to do. The groups themselves don't swap around, but the content will come and go as we look at our design. So let's start, I think, if we go into the preview here, I'm just going to preview this first piece of the job, which is the top layer, which is probably the most complicated single part. Notice that because we've got this in sheets mode now, and in fact, if I page up, this might make life a bit easier for you to see exactly what's going on. This will reflect whatever I've selected in here. So similarly, I can select from here, as we discussed. They're all the same, in sync with one another. Okay, and when I do click all toolpaths now, preview all toolpaths, it will actually be all the toolpaths for the selected active sheet. So it's kind of convenient, but you can just whiz through all of the toolpaths for that sheet. So remember, all these came in one go. And the reason they came in is because, like I said, the layers here are now providing the artwork for those templates to work relatively automatically from this point on. And it means I could do a whole series of designs as long as the artwork was on the right layers. These templates would apply. So that's the first thing. While I'm in this, I'm going to just mention one thing about the pocket. This is quite a trivial pocket because it's just for this rather thin inlay. And so I'm only actually using one tool. But one of the other things that's occurred in version 11 is that we have made the efficiency of rest machining pockets much better. So with quite a bit of analysis and going back to some fairly first principles again, our lead developer on this, Mark, has been able to leverage some really significant improvements in minimizing what the finest tool has to do, if that makes sense. So we're able to carve more than previously we thought possible by adjusting the strategy a little bit with the bigger and bigger tools. And so what you should find is some fairly significant speed ups in non-trivial examples. So this is obviously quite a simple one, but when you're doing a more sophisticated pocket with 3 or 4 tools, what you should see in 11 is a fairly significant speed up in that case. So I just wanted to mention that. What I also want to show you is very quickly now that although we've picked up our toolpath template, okay, so when I come in here, I can see that it's found. Let's actually, so yeah, we'll take this cutout pass here. It's found for a hard wood here that it's going to take 2 passes, and for the thinner brass, in fact, if I move across to the brass and we actually play that one out, you'll see that it's actually still only doing 1 pass through the brass. Now the reason for that is quite simply that it is using whatever values were associated with the toolpath template. Okay, and the Toolpath template only has one set of values for this tool geometry. But you may have already noticed that our tool database has added the ability for us to associate different feeds and speeds to the same tool, relating to different material types. So in other words, this 1/8, I've used the 1/8 ball end mill in all of these examples, but the feeds and speeds are not going to be sensibly the same for hardwood or acrylic or brass, right? So how do we fix that problem? Well, what we can do now is we can notice, for example, here that there's going to be one pass through the end mill in acrylic, and that's because it's picked up the hardwood settings that I used to make the template. And that's, I have to apologize straight away now, because although I'm using Imperial tools, which will be pleasing to some of you, I still really struggle to imagine speeds in inches per minute, which seems to be the default for most people in the CNC world. But I can't imagine what 4 inches per minute looks like in terms of practical movement. So all of my feeds and speeds, I'm afraid, are in millimeters a second, because I can imagine what 1 centimeter a second looks like. Yeah. Sorry about that. So yes, we've got a weird mismatch. But anyway, just to be clear, 1 centimeter a second and doing a full kind of pass depth, which is the same as the diameter of the tool, that's an aggressive cut, especially on a kind of relatively small machine like the one over my shoulder. For brass, that's definitely not going to be good. But I have already worked through the brass stuff, and so I can just select now from my tool database for the same tool geometry what feeds and speeds I think are more appropriate for brass. And as I select the brass settings, you can see it's halved the plunge and feed rates, and it's also dramatically reduced the pass depth. So I can select that and apply that, and now you can see we've got plenty more passes down. We've also got some ramping in here, which probably be more appropriate as well. So I've got, although it's not directly linked to the material that I've described in my sheet, it's much easier for me now manually to match correctly the feeds and speeds that I think are appropriate for this particular part. Okay. So again, you can do that for the acrylic too. I've created acrylic settings, which will be somewhere in the middle of the brass and the hardwood cutting. Okay, so that's the basics of doing using the sheets alongside some Toolpath templates. I do want to just show you as well one other small change in one specific Toolpath strategy that we've got here is previously, if I just go back to our walnut top surface, which is the 5mm one here, and we turn that on, what I've got at the moment is a little chamfer toolpath going on here, just to take the edges off. So you probably saw as we were doing this that we come round and finish off the edges of our toolpath, our part here, with a nice chamfered edge, just using a V-bit tool. But let's say I want to do something a little bit more curved, okay, then I can use a ball nose, and we can use the old molding toolpath. So hopefully you've come across molding toolpath. It's been in for a couple of versions now. But previously it was quite difficult to use with a toolpath template. And the reason was, if we look at that toolpath strategy, it requires 2 sorts of vector. It requires a vector for the boundary itself, and it also requires, if I just move my video out of the way here, you can see at the bottom, it also requires us to choose both the rail, in other words, the boundary that we're going to carve around, and the profile. And that was sort of slightly awkward to do in a Toolpath template, because generally the templates are associated with one vector layer. How do we distinguish between these 2 things? Well, this allows us to select 2 vector layers, basically, associated with this strategy. And what I've got here tucked away on my layers is 2 extra layers, a molding profile and a molding path. So if we just zoom in here and I turn these on, you can see that it's only a little curved profile. But crucially, it's on a layer called molding profile. And then there's a path which is 1mm inside the other one, which is on a layer called molding path. Okay, so the important thing here is that those names match a Toolpath template, which I've previously created. So let's open that up, called Edge Molding. And we can apply that. It goes through all the templates, but it only finds the vectors associated with this layer on this particular sheet, right? So it's done that. If we just knock out everything except the chamfer, we don't want to run the chamfer in this case. and I just preview all the visible toolpaths. Now you can see that I've got a little rounded edge on the top surface instead of the V-bit chamfer. Okay, so the crucial thing here is that with the molding toolpath, we've extended it so that you can use templates with that, just as you would any other toolpath in version 11. And the molding toolpath, for the molding, this is very handy because it's this sort of toolpath that you do often set up once and want to use broadly the same strategy and the same tool set, but with different profiles, for example. And now you can keep that that template handy, and as long as you just put the profile on the same named layer, you can rerun the template, which should improve a lot of things. Okay, so the last thing on toolpathing directly I want to show you, for those of you using the laser module. Okay, so the laser module allows us to do hybrid machining. The machine I have behind me, for example, I keep wanting to go the wrong way. The machine I have behind me, it's a magnetic laser head. So once I've done carving, I can literally just snap magnetically the laser onto the side of that router there, and run over the same material using all the same datums and X, Y, and Z offsets. I can run a laser toolpath completely synchronized with the carving I've just done. So in this case, what I do is want to cut the back of this bottle opener, and then I want to just decorate it with a hatched version of the Vectric logo. So there's been a few changes here. So let's just, if I just select that and we go into the laser toolpath strategy and I select our vectors here. Crucially, we were previously just hatch filling individually shapes like this if they were separate. So in other words, it would do the V before the E, and then the C, and then the T, and each one it would do a little tiny hatch and then move the machine. And the reason for this, obviously, is that in CNC world, conventionally with woodcutting, we've always worried about air moves. So a lot of the last 20 years of my life have been about stopping the machine moving, doing unnecessary plunges, retracts, and air moves, right, and trying to keep the machine cutting as much as possible with a minimum, if you like, useless middle connections. With the laser, the world is slightly different, because the laser, really, what you want to do is get the machine up to speed rastering, and then because there's no plunges or retracts and the laser is instantaneously turned on and off, you just want to keep it really moving and just use the laser power settings to make the adjustments, and they're practically instantaneous, so there's no penalty. And in fact, decelerating and accelerating to do individual areas might end up making a much longer toolpath in time than this alternative strategy. So by choosing fill together, we can just, I don't need to do anything else, just calculate that, that's it. You can see what we've got here is it kind of rastering constantly, and then the purple is laser off and the blue you can see is kind of laser on. And so it just toggles the laser on and off with the minimum number of air moves it kind of needs to finish. There's some more air moves in here because I've also kept outline on, so it comes back then and does an outline around the hatching as well, just for good measure. In the latest version, we can preview that as well. So we can preview, in fact, I can just do what I was doing before. I can just preview, just reset that, preview all the toolpaths, and then you can see the whole thing. So it's doing a sort of hybrid machining. It's done the cutout, the chamfering, it's dropped in some drill holes, and then it's also added this laser hatch across the top. So we get a really good view of what the finished part is going to look like before we commit. And it's a part obviously made from a hybrid process of machining and lasering over the same material. So hopefully that's quick whistle through, what really I hope it feels to you like a very coherent set of features, really, when you sort of which coalesce around doing these slightly more complicated projects. But hopefully also they won't interfere with any of the simple jobs either. So this just hopefully makes you keen to try something a little bit more multi-material in the future. So the last thing I want to talk about on this part of the demo before we go to 3D stuff in a second is about machine configuration. Now, the discussions we've just had up until now pretty much relate to 2 and 2.5D machining in total, right? So there's nothing that's not doable in VCarve, and most of what you've seen is doable in Cut 2D, with the exception of some of those decorative toolpath strategies like molding and V-bit carving. But the principles of sheets, the principles of the materials in your tool database, and toolpath templates, all those things are Cut 2D as well. Okay. And the final thing I want to talk about is machine descriptions. So another big change we've made for 11 is to try and help you manage your machine configurations a little bit more easily. And there's two parts to that. One is, as a new customer, or if you buy a new machine, you should be able to find your machine already defined by us. So there's various ways to go and look for a machine if you're new to the software. One is to just install one of our offline packages, which you'll be able to download from the portal. Ideally, if you've got an internet connection, a live internet connection though, so we offer the package download for those people whose machining PC is not connected to the internet, which is entirely sensible, and plenty of you out there are doing it. And so we always bear in mind that our software always works in isolation from the internet if needs be, right? But if you do have an internet connection, obviously we can make things more convenient, right? We just never make it impossible to use without an internet connection. But the most convenient way is simply to search your machine online if you've got an internet connection, and you can just pick it and it will come down. When you bring that machine down, we'll also bring in some associated feeds and speeds for the tool database, which broadly match the capabilities of a machine of that type. And off you go, basically. Now, if you've got a custom machine, you can simply add one completely fresh using this button. But we would recommend, because we do bring in these feeds and speeds into the tool database, and the tool database is quite extensive, there's 50 or more tools in there, then you might be better actually to use this button. If you want to do it, if you've got a custom machine which you know is similar in performance or characteristics to another more commercially available machine, my recommendation would be to download that one, download the commercial one from our database, and then actually use this to copy the active machine, to make a duplicate of it, and to edit the copy. And that way you'll keep in sync all of your tool database settings as well, without having to do them all manually, because otherwise you're going to have to go into the tool database and copy over for the new machine type in your tool database. The other thing I want to mention, so that's machine setup. The other thing that we do here is that notice that we've called this machine configuration as well, because the other thing we appreciate is not just the new customers, but experienced customers as well have different setups for their machines. They sometimes, you have to mount the rotary axis temporarily, and then you'll remove it. And when you do, you'll adjust potentially the width and height, the work envelope of the machine. Similarly, you'll probably want a different post processor when it's set up in this configuration. So the idea with our machine configuration management is that even if you only have the one CNC machine, you can capture different configurations of that machine neatly. Excuse me. The associated post processors here, in my case, I'm in the process at the moment of working on a new post processor because they've updated the firmware for the machine I have behind me from version 2 to 3. It's quite a severe breaking change, unfortunately. So you'll notice a little pen next to my post processor in this list. That means it's my post processor that I'm working on. It's simply a file, just like the old systems used to be, a text file that I edit with the information in it. And crucially, Vectric's not really going to do anything with it. It says here the version is latest because there's nothing else it can be. It's my file and I edit it, so it'll always be whatever that file is. And we can get at that file at any time. If I go in here to open up the post processor manager here, you'll see this one with a pen is at the top, and it's unique, at the moment. What it means is that this is mine. All the other ones without a pen are ones that Vectric is going to manage. So they are post processors that we're keeping in a big database now. We audit and can keep track of change control on them very carefully. We're dealing often with the manufacturers directly about the performance of their machines, what things they can and can't do, and therefore our post processors have to reflect that. But you as users, if you want, you can have your own posts and do whatever you like with them, right? I'm hoping that we get our side of things really good, and that 99% of you can just use the post that's associated with your manufacturer's machine tool and forget about it. For the rest of you, though, you can take any existing post that we have here, and you can customize it. And when you do, you'll get a copy up here for you to edit. And when you want to edit it, you can just get in here. You can open the file location and just edit it with any normal text editor. However, if you want to use one of our posts, there's a little bonus in there, which is that we can also keep track. We can keep it up to date for you if there are changes that are appropriate. So I'm just going to press G. Let's open up. I'm going to add the default G code post to my machine configuration here, and you'll notice here that it's also saying latest but V2. And that's because we've had some changes to the default G-code post. There's a version 1 and a version 2. If you like, you can just leave it at latest, and that means that whenever we update this post and we're confident that the changes that we've done are tested and safe, you will inherit those changes whenever you synchronize with the cloud up here or with your post processors list. You don't have to do that, and we understand that in a manufacturing environment, you don't want, when it works, do not change it, and that is fine, and we've tried very hard to ensure that we never interfere with that. In principle. So if you feel like that, then you can choose here a very specific version, and if you choose that version, we'll never update it. Okay, so you can fix it to a version and leave it there. All right. So that's a very quick. We're going to do much more discussions about post processors, etc., in due course, but that's a quick overview of it. And I think that's it. So this is the sort of the 2D thing. I'm going to open another file now, and we're going to look in a lot more detail about the 3D changes that we've made, which are Aspire specific. Okay, so I've opened up the this 3D part now in Aspire. So a lot of what we're going to see now is a sort of Aspire type 3D manipulation work. That's quite typical. I'll just page up so we can see both the 2D and the 3D view here. So I've got a sheet of material here, which again is just my design space at this point. So I've not cared at all really apart from anything apart from a dimension that's handy for me to lay the parts out in. And then I've imported, using the standard import process, a free 3D model from TurboSquid. So this was a triangle mesh model downloaded and imported, and all I've done is sort of split it along the midline so that you can see it's a broadly symmetrical model. Got some trouble down here with undercuts, but we won't worry about that. We're just going to make a relatively crude 2 parts of this model. And what I'd like to do is kind of decorate it a little bit more, because it's a little bit flat on its feathers. So the feathers are quite nice. I think it's a scan of a real a key ring of some sort, but the feathers lack a bit of texture, and I think because we're going to blow it up into a bigger size when we cut this now, you can see that I'm a few inches across now. We probably would find that a little bit plain, so I'm going to demonstrate how we can improve that. So first things first, let's add some feather texture here using the new features. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a component first, which we're going to use as a brush to sculpt over the surface. Okay, so the way that we do that, so let's just have a look at our modeling layout. So we just brought in this model. Like I say, that's just a straightforward import. So before I go any further, I'm going to copy that so that we have a spare in case of trouble. In fact, I'm going to just use duplicate. That'd be more efficient. And then I'm going to use this one that we're going to sculpt on. But to start with, I'm going to create my brush. And to do that, I'm going to need to create a little bit of artwork. So I'm just going to create a boundary, not a circle, in fact, but an ellipse. Let's get this right. So an ellipse. And I'm going to align it vertically on the model, because it turns out that later on, as we use this brush, it's important that it's vertically aligned, and I'll explain that in a second. And I just want to put a texture across it, and I want to grow that shape with a texture across it. Now, ideally, I'd like the texture to sort of just be a little bit zigzaggy, you know, so that it forms some form of kind of shape there. I don't even care about the orientation or anything, because it's just for an effect that I'm after. In the modeling now, if I go to create a shape from Vector Outlines in version 11, you'll see that the modeling tool in version 11 has had quite an overhaul. And in particular, there's a brand new modeling profile type here. So typically, we've always had these curves and prefixed profile shapes, but now you can also just choose an arbitrary shape, and that's what we're going to do. So we're going to choose the boundary like we always would, but with this option selected, I can also select my custom profile, and once I've got that selected, I can do, you know, all the usual things, but basically let's just apply that and have a look. And you can see up here that what we've done is kind of just created a 3D shape made up of that profile across the surface of the boundary that we selected. Doesn't need to be very clever. You're going to see in a minute that the whole system is extremely forgiving, which is good for me. I'm still probably going to make a hash of it because I've only got a mouse and I'm not very artistically talented, but we'll do our best for you. Luckily for me, I'm confident over the next 3 days, loads of people are going to be doing much better sculpting work with the new tools than me. So it's just to demonstrate the principle. So I apply that. So I've just created effectively a component called feather. That's all we've done here. And what I'm going to do with that feather is I'm going to use the new option here to save it as a sculpting brush. So I just right click, choose that. It opens up my sculpting brushes folder. You can see I've already done one, but just to prove I'm not entirely sleight of hand, I'll overwrite that one. And then we can actually hide that. We don't need that anymore because it's saved to disk. And in fact, I can get rid of the artwork as well. And now I can come back and select the owl, which we were going to sculpt over the surface of. And in fact, I'll go full screen with the 3D view for this bit. Okay, so my plan is to sculpt down the wing and the body a little bit with that new feather shape using the sculpting tool. When I open that, you can see if I choose add here, one of the options I can do, rather than as previously just have a kind of a smooth paintbrushy shape, I can actually pick any arbitrary shape I like, defined as any of those 3D clips that I've saved. So any relief file that you model, you can now start to use as a brush. So I'm going to load in my feather. Okay, and it appears there, a little preview of it. And I can see it on the screen here. If I zoom in a little bit, scale it up, you can see that there's my little shadowy representation of it. If what I'm going to do though is I don't want to sculpt with it always being vertical. I want it to flow along the body shape of the owl. So I'm going to use this option to dynamically rotate it, and I'm going to merge it in as it goes. Because I've got dynamic rotation on now, it's telling me as I drag the mouse, it's going to turn this model where that arrow is showing, and the arrow will always be pointed in the direction of travel of my sculpting either tablet pen or mouse in my case. And that's fine, right? That's what I want it to do. But I also know that I'm going to start here, not by dragging upwards, I'm going to start by dragging downwards. So if I press the R key down, I can actually reorientate this brush so it's roughly in the right direction for where I want to start. And then this is really it. I just need to just drag this tool. And you can see that as I move around, it automatically is placing the copies of the brush in the orientation that I'm moving, so that I get this effect. And as I say, it's a very forgiving effect, so I'm able to get away with being quite choppy with my artwork. Similarly here, if I just rotate it a little bit vertically, and perhaps we make it a little bit smaller down here, I can run it down the body here too. And I'm going to just not overcook this, because you can see I'm not brilliant at it. But like I said, hopefully the artists among you can see the potential of this, okay, for creating rather difficult to produce textures previously. Okay, now I've overrun a little bit there, but luckily for me, my favorite and most used tool is the undo brush, so I can clean up my bad habits a little bit around here and a little bit across the foot there, so that we can see. But now you can get the idea, at least, that what I've been able to do here is add a texture very trivially that also flows broadly in line with the organic shape of the model. And again, often if you're importing 3D mesh files, it's these textured surfaces that are lacking. A lot of 3D modelers provided in the model stores and stuff are really designed for rendering, and so they use imagery and a lot of fakery to produce detail. And ultimately, when we machine, we still need that detail physically in the model. So one of the things that's quite common when you import a model is also to add a bit more extra detail like this. I think most of you will have experienced that. Okay, so that's my extended model. Now let's think about how we're actually going to manufacture it. Okay, so first things first, let's pin out my toolpath, because we're going to move to that kind of mode. And I'm going to turn on the material block and experience the first problem. So in my design space, I didn't really care about material, so it's kind of not going to fit in the design space. But anyway, I don't intend to cut this like this. I intend to cut this laid out into a sheet. So what I've done is actually created a sheet already, which really represents what I'm actually going to use to cut the material here. Okay, and what I want to do is move the parts into this and actually lay them out separately as a manufacturing space. And you can see I'm intending for it to be a 20mm MDF, so just under an inch thick MDF sheet. It's about 300mm by 300mm, so it's a pretty large sheet, but it fits on the machine behind me, and typical of the sort of material that's actually available to us. This model, though, unfortunately, is 30+mm, so well over an inch and getting on for an inch and a half thick. So we need to sort that out. And the way we would typically do that is to slice the model according to the thickness of the material that we're going to cut it in. So let's go and have a look at that process. I'm going to go to the relief slicing tool. And hopefully you can see here that this has had a massive overhaul for 11. It's a really much more visually and interactively usable tool. And the reason we had to do it like that is because although I say I want to slice this to fit it into 20mm sheets, the reality is as well, you need to take into account the shape that you're slicing. And I know, for example, here that I've got a 31mm, getting on 30mm model, and I've got to fit it into 20mm thick sheets. So I can get away with two 15mm slices, right? But actually those 15mm slices might not be very good in terms of the shape here. They might cause a bit of the beak to be separated from the rest of the model, or some of the tail to be included when we don't want it. So you can obviously still do all the same things that you used to do before. So you can adjust the slices here and just have it work out those slices. And so that's the exact halfway point for us, for example. But see what I mean? This area here is a little bit awkward, isn't it? Right, so it's going to leave a gap there, and this will be a fragile piece. So actually, I'd rather go a little bit deeper for one of these slices. Yeah. So what I'm doing now is I'm just double clicking in directly on the model. And the slice, therefore, is picking up the shape of the model. And now I can see this is a much more coherent slice, yeah, for me to take. It's going to be strong, there's no gaps, and it doesn't cause any awkward islands. So that's the value of that, which is fine. And I can see here that the other slice thickness is going to be 17. So they're both going to fit in a 20mm block. But because of the graphical interactivity now, I can make sure that it's appropriate for the actual shape I am slicing. So let's slice that. And I get the two parts. Can't see much at the moment, but they do exist. There's one and there's the other, but they're lying on top of each other. So let's go back to the 2D view now to the next stage here. Oh, I've created vectors. I didn't really need the vectors actually for this demo, but it's another thing that we can do now. In a minute, I'm going to need to find boundary vectors for these parts. You've always been able to find the external boundary vector very easily in Aspire, but when you slice, you kind of also have an internal boundary, which is only ever going to be a place on which the next slice rests. So quite often it's useful, in fact, to offset that in and hollow out the shape that you're carving. You might even be able to put some smaller parts inside bigger parts, which only need to be the frame edge. That boundary was previously hard to find. So what we've done is basically build it into the slicing tool now. So if you want, you can get those vector boundaries as part of the slicing process, and then that's much more helpful in trying to keep everything together and to find the inner bits of material that you can get rid of, which are not part of the important parts of the model. Right, I don't need them for this demo, but I'll point it out because it's a new feature. What I do want to do for this demo though, is I want to move these parts across onto my MDF sheet. Because remember, the slices are now the manufacturing parts. So from my perspective, I think they should go onto the manufacturing sheet. So that's slice 1, and this is slice 2. So just moving them to the MDF sheet. And they're on top of each other at the moment, but in fact I just want to space them out because we want to cut the parts not one on top of the other but next to one another. And remember, I need two halves of this model, so I need a mirror image of these two parts for the other half. So I'm going to select those, Control C, Control V to copy them, drag that up there, and I'm just going to press H, and that just flips those over to form the mirror images for the other half of the part. Got quite a big piece of material here. I feel like we might be able to fit more parts in. I could be able to maybe able to cut 2 owls here. So what I'm going to do is use the nesting tool directly on the component parts to see what I can fit into this piece of material. Excuse me. I really keep meaning to go and get a glass of water because I'm talking too much. Right. So nesting. Let's select these parts. And you can see all the usual nesting stuff is here. There's a little bit of extra stuff to do with sheets, which somebody will cover, I'm sure, in the next day or two. But basically, I'm going to choose, because I've already moved the parts onto my manufacturing sheet, I'm just going to nest the things onto the active sheet from the active sheet, right? And because of that as well, I'm going to remove the original parts, because the original parts, effectively now exist on the design space, and I can always reproduce new slices if I need to. So this is purely about the manufacturing layout that I want for the MDF sheet on my machine. So I'm going to make 2 copies of everything. Let's apply that. I've allowed, I know I'm going to cut this with an 1/8 inch tool ultimately, so I'm going to allow about 3mm around the edge and a bit of extra clearance. Let's preview that. Okay, so you can see straight away that that has now nested those parts very nicely for me, and I've still got a bit of space. Might even get another half a bird in there, don't know. But for now, let's go with that. And you can see I've still, obviously my design space is still here, right, with the original outline. So that's pretty cool, I think, if we just remind ourselves. So I can now just hop around these two elements, all in the same job, and obviously closely related, but separate parts, if you like, of the CNC process, and now being kept nicely separated in a way that I think hopefully will help everyone. So there's the parts for machining. Let's, before we go any further, we're going to need some boundaries for those. So let's select those and use the traditional boundary creation there. And now what I want to do is show you a little bit of enhancement to the 3D machining. In fact, a really significant enhancement to one of the machining strategies, but I will mention the roughing as well. So I'm not going to use the roughing in this demo, but we have improved the roughing such that you can now, the orientation of raster roughing toolpaths is selectable, and also it does now, it's got some significant improvements in the coverage that it does when it's roughing. Okay, so there's some algorithmic changes there behind the scenes as well, which should all go to improve toolpath optimization. But where we've made some big UI changes, which are worth pointing out and a bit more demoable directly to you, are the finish machining, where we've essentially added the idea of rest machining now for 3D finishing. So just as in 2D pockets and 2D area clearance, we can now stack up tools of progressively finer geometry, but we will only use the finer geometry in the areas that we've missed in the previous passes with the larger tool geometry. So for big jobs like this, it means that you can save an awful lot of time by hogging out the majority of the material with your large tool and only coming back and picking out the detailed areas that you need to with a finer tool. For the demo here, I've just set it up with a 1/4 inch ball nose and a 1/8, and I've got the model boundaries set up here, and so it will automatically find these boundaries. Actually, I'm going to need the other boundaries for the cutout pass, but it's going to find the boundaries. I've asked it to offset out by 3mm. Like I said, we're allowing a little bit of space so that the finishing tools can actually properly roll over and complete the very edges of the parts. That's about it, really. So down here, we've got the rest machining, which allows us to adjust just how much effort the software goes to find increasingly smaller and smaller areas where it thinks it can get more detail out. At some point, there's a trade-off here where the benefit of finding 16 more tiny regions and the air moves to get there don't justify the extra detail that you're going to get. So that's what the coarse fine is basically adjusting. And you can also have your smaller tool overrun the individual rest machining boundaries as well by a boundary offset if you want them just to clean up the boundary between the bigger and the smaller tool. In our case, we're going to leave that alone. We're going to leave everything pretty much default, and I'm just going to run that. Take a little time this because it's doing quite a lot of analytics effectively of the shapes, but still you can see it's fairly big sheet, quite complicated parts, and it's still pretty rapid, even running as I am on a virtual machine, so it's not even running directly on the hardware. Okay, so let's have a look. So what we've got, 2 bits here. There's the I'll show you the roughing bit first. So it's brought in the big tool, it's come over the surface. As you can see, it's just a sort of offset strategy. You can choose offset or raster strategy. What I've done is offset the bigger tool, and then I've kind of come back in and rastered with the smaller tool just for, in fact, no, I've offset both, haven't I? But you can choose to do different strategies between the two. But crucially here, what I'm hoping you can see is that the final smaller tool is only being used on very, very small areas, so that you can get a much faster result and hopefully still get the best bang for your buck out of that toolpath. Before we go ahead and simulate that, we're going to need to, well, actually, I'll show you what it looks like. Let's do that first. So obviously, because we're using a ball nose tool, it'll come down to where the edge of the material, but it's going to leave some skin there. So to get these parts really cut out cleanly, I just need to run something around the edge. So I'm just going to also add, for the purposes of completing the demo, a profile toolpath, and this is where I did need those boundaries, vector boundaries. I'll use an 1/8 end mill again. Ah, right. So it's going to try and do 16 passes here. That's because we've got a 20mm block, and the step down for this end mill is obviously quite fine, so it's going to do small passes there. We definitely don't need 16 passes because we know that we've already cleared the material. So I'm actually going to set that to 1 pass at 20. Okay, and then I'm just going to OK that, and you can see we set that to 1 pass. You'll see in a second I'm safe to do that because we have already cleared the material with the ball nose tool, right? So I can just go down there. This is literally a clean up cutout pass, really, just so I can delete the waste material and you can get a feel for the finished results. Okay, so here we go. There's the actual parts. Hopefully you can see it's I hope it's a really significant improvement in the workflow of doing this sort of job. Yeah, so I've tried to whiz through lots of the new features. Again, they will all be covered in more detail over the next 3 days. But what hopefully you're seeing is that they are bringing together this much more coherent way of dealing with the manufacturing space as opposed to the design space, and being able to use your design to manufacture in different ways within one file without one thing ruining the layout of the other thing, which we've previously, with only one sheet, this has been really difficult to do. Okay, so that is the basic layout. There's a couple more things to say. One is that potentially you could have done this as a two-sided part. If you did, you will also find there's some new features there that allow you to swap sides, which is a really neat improvement. It used to be pretty laborious if you'd created something on one side and you actually wanted the top surface to be the bottom surface or vice versa. Now we've sorted all out for you, so you can swap the top for the bottom and vice versa very easily. But more importantly, the imported model here was quite crude, if you remember. So let's go back from our laid out design space here, and let's close this toolpath down and have a look at this model again. In fact, what I'll do is go back to 2D view, select this, and so this is the original model that we imported, and I need to get rid of the fact that I've got the preview up, so let's go to that. Okay, so this is the original model we imported. Now, here's the important problem that I mentioned right at the beginning. There's a lot of undercut, potentially, that this model originally had that we can't get on our CNC machine. Our machine can only machine it from above. And so the model as it is has loads of areas that are inaccessible to our CNC machine. And the final result, therefore, is going to have some parts of it which are basically quite tricky for us to finish, or indeed they're just missing because they are shadowed effectively by material above them. But the model does have this stuff, right? And if we could just break the model up into some smaller parts and lay different parts of the model at different orientations, we could probably solve this problem. And that's what we've been able to do in the latest version. And to get there, another interesting thing we've been able to add is when you've imported any model, if the original mesh file, the triangle mesh file that you imported, is still on disk in the same location, we store the path to that and we store the settings that were used for the import with the imported component. And so that means that even now, coming back to this file, which I imported this model some days ago, because the original model is still on my disk and it's still in the same location, we have the option to re-import. And when I click that, it actually finds that model, it puts up the importing system, reapplies the settings that have been stored, and shows me exactly where I was at the moment where I clicked import before. Okay, and I can get back to that stage. So it's really a big time saver if you work with external models. And now you can see in the external model, it does have all this information. It does have all this nicer finish here. The log is in fact not symmetrical. And obviously between his claws here is a lot more detail that we've simply lost because we can't machine it from this direction. So let's actually go back and have a look at this new form of the import model, which includes a new option here to segment the model. And what that means is we can actually take the model and dissect it, if you like, first, and then lay out the dissected parts of this model as if they were independent models. And this means we can adjust the orientation of independent parts of the model to best suit the 3-axis machining profile of our cutters. Okay, so in this case, for example, what I can do is cut his feet off. Sad as that sounds, I can cut his feet off, but it does mean I'll be able to access this part of the model in a completely different orientation from the top. So let's go ahead and do that. So instead of position and import, which is essentially the old approach for quick and dirty models which don't have undercut issues, continue to use that, it's super fast. I'm going to use the now much more sophisticated but really powerful segmenting process. So when I come into the segmenting tool, I can see here essentially that I've got a slice already through, and I can adjust that slice dynamically in the 3D view using this artboard and this positioning arrow. I can also adjust the values up here, so I can do a little bit of both. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to first of all rotate this slice around the x-axis here so that it's basically horizontal. I can see here that I can just get that exactly horizontal by typing a value of 90 in there, and then I can run it down to the ankle area of this bird. Okay, and you can see as well that I can kind of rotate it a little bit more round in Z here to try and capture just that bit. So you can see here I'm going to take a slice through his feet to take off the log. Notice I'm about to clip a little bit of his tail off as well, and I'll show you how we're going to sort that out in a second. But that's good. I'm going to take those and let's just click the segment button. And down here you will see that we now have a model that's made up of two parts: the feet that I've sliced off and the bird. Okay. The tail here is a pain, isn't it? Because really we don't need that bit to be part of the feet model. So it turns out you can kind of rejoin bits back that you don't want, because we realized that this was a necessary part of the process. So the first thing I need to do is just separate that bit off, and I can just use any arbitrary, well, not arbitrary, but I can just easily segment that away. So now I've got the tail and the feet separately, and then this tail I can just drag that back up onto the original bird and it comes back on. Yeah, you see, so we kind of rehealed it back on so that now we have the two parts that we genuinely want. Okay, so with the bird, I can just reset the rotation of our thing, because I'm going to slice him broadly the same way. You can see that I could, if I was really keen now, I could kind of slice him a little bit more to deal with this undercut and find different areas that were better. But again, I'll leave them a more sophisticated demo of this to come later in the UGM. For now, I'm going to segment the two halves just as we did before. So now we just got our two halves just like we had before. And I'm going to take the feet though, and this time round I can actually rotate my layer, not that way. Let's reset that so that we can, in fact, what I want to do in this case is rotate it round so that we're going to cut the claws off about here. So you can see here that the log now, I can get broadly two parts of that. So let's segment that, and let's just import the whole lot. And I won't worry too much about the details. Obviously, it's going to be spread out a bit at the moment. Now, in an ideal world, obviously, I would create another sheet here to do this. So let's do that. So I'm going to add a new sheet here. Let's drag all these across. So we can move these to sheet 1, like so. And let's have a look at the parts all in situ. 3D view. Okay, so there you can see an alternative way of going. Now, obviously, we can slice this again to fit it into the 20mm block, but you can see already that the end result we're going to get will capture way more of the original data from the model. So that's segmenting. There's a whole ton of stuff to be said about segmenting. I only want to just highlight it in the context of 3D model manipulation at this point. Loads more to come in the UGM ahead, which I hope you will all enjoy. So that's kind of my roundup of the what's new for now.